Well, welcome to another episode of the Twice Told Tales podcast. Today we have Ken. He's joining us from Kuala Lumpur. How are you doing, Ken?
Good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Hi, Satare. Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Hi. Good to see you after a long time.
Mm.
So, Sitar, do you have some questions for Ken?
Well, I would like to ask him to start by introducing himself.
Okay, where do I start? Just a short one, Satare. Not too long. I don't need to tell 1,001 nights. Till,
Yes.
I'm okay. Maybe I'm a researcher, a research a lecturer before. Based in Kuala Lumpur, working with one of the MPs in Malaysia right now. But also I help out with teaching and workshop with NGOs and also community groups. Previously, if I was in Iran from 2018 to 2020 before COVID. Then I came back to Kuala Lumpur and I've been based here ever since till now. Yeah, I'm from Penang, so I'm based in Kuala Lumpur right now, but I'm Penang. So maybe besides Kuala Lumpur, Chris, maybe you would come to Penang. Also, Penang's an island up north. It's a nice place. I know if you've been there, Setare. So that's where that's where my hometown and state is, and I've been in Kuala Lumpur, I think, for about close to 15 to 20 years now, I think, since university.
Great.
Is that enough, Setari?
Yes. Yeah, that's perfect.
Right.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can start asking more detailed questions. So what is your work mainly about? As far as I remember, you studied history, right?
I
History
was
of...
in the Malay Studies department in the National University of Singapore, but my thesis was on Malaysian political history. So I wrote on Malaysian political history. Yeah, but I also have interest in more broadly general Asian history, political history, and also of course Iranian cultural and political history. Yeah, right now,
Great.
right now, yeah. So since coming back from Iran, right now I'm more involved in policy research and also writing. Yeah, for some of for again an MP in Parliament. So yeah, but I'm hoping to then move back into teaching and research, academic teaching and research. So
great. So are you working with the MP in your field of study, what you studied in for your PhD, or is it something like different?
it's different and also the same in the sense that the parliament debates that take place cover a broad range of different issue and fields. So we discuss and we do research. So me and the team, which helps him out, we do research on areas including government and institutional reform, to the economy, to society and social inclusion, and then to environment. So it covers a broad range of fields. So the ones that I'm more familiar with, of course, are the ones like in politics, law, and government. But also we have people who come in and help out, and also we do a lot of readings on other fields also, especially on climate. I think climate has been something that everyone is talking about at the moment, right? Everywhere. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Chris probably has some questions about that, right?
Yeah, what do you find is the issue on climate? Are people like sort of myopically focused on carbon dioxide, or are they talking about a broad range of things like deforestation and pollution, non-carbon pollution, and that sort of thing? Or is it mostly about climate change?
I think there are various. Yeah, the government does talk about CO2, carbon emissions, the carbon cap, IPCC, and things like that, achieving the goals and the milestones. But it, I would think that it covers larger issues also, like Chris mentioned, deforestation, which is a huge issue in Malaysia. Um, we have many NGOs, which is something that is good over the last, despite COVID, we have many young groups, young people, NGOs who talk about reclamation, deforestation, um, um, uncontrolled development, property and housing development. So, um, habitat conservation. So yeah, it covers a broad
That's good.
range. Yeah.
That's good. I find, I mean, my just personal observation is that a lot of times it's heavily focused on the carbon dioxide issue, and that's probably the least of our concerns in reality. I mean, for forests and nature, and destroying all of that through all the other ways that humans pollute and consume things seems to be not as politically viable or profitable. So when you can sell people new products like electric cars and that kind of thing, the corporations are really want to do that much more than they want to do anything else. And then let alone the actual implications of what carbon dioxide means to the planet. People don't look very closely at that. But anyway, that's great to hear that they're doing a lot of deforestation mitigation, or at least talking about it. That's good.
Yeah, the conversations and debates are there. Only I suppose um, the extent of it, I suppose, is still very much concentrated and limited. Yeah. So we have many groups, but also the larger public. I think many or just about starting to get more familiar, and it's also very capital centric, I would believe, mainly based in Kuala Lumpur and the big cities. But so yeah, so at the same time, it's happening, it's moving, but the reach of it is also slightly um, limited. But you can see more and more are trying, and I think many government officials and also especially parliaments on both sides of the block. I think it helps to create awareness and spread more to bring out the message to people around the country.
Yeah, well, a lot of the environmental topics are both capital and capital centric in the environmental issue, because a lot of the government bureaucrats who discuss environmental issues are detached completely from the environment. They live in a completely artificial existence, and so much of what they discuss has to be taken with a grain of salt, because they don't actually understand uh, what it means to be living in or near a forest or any of that kind of stuff. But that's good. I know Malaysia is, it's in a very tropical area, so you have rainforests and a lot of very rare endemic birds and other species there. So that's a responsibility of the citizens, I guess, to protect that. I'm also interested in Malaysia as it concerns with being politically in some aspects being very politically sort of independent and brave. I know it because they held those tribunals to how did they term it? Basically have Bush and Cheney as war criminals, for what was that trial? That was in Malaysia, wasn't it? It was in the or because of the Iraq War, they had these trials in Malaysia. That's one of the political things about Malaysia. I was like, oh yeah, that's the place that that was willing to. Do you remember that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think that was a few years back, was it?
A
I
long
think,
time ago.
yeah,
It was like probably 10 years
yeah,
ago or something. And it was
yeah.
like, but it made a
Mhm.
big impact because I think it was the only country in the world that was like, that officially, and I wasn't the whole government, it was a couple representatives, but they like called out officially like Bush as a war criminal. And yeah, like I think they even called for his arrest or something. But
I
yeah.
think,
So what do you
yeah, I think,
think about it, Ken?
Yeah, what
Do
do
you
you think
remember
about
that,
that
and what do
whole
you think about it?
I think it was a few. Yeah, so I was trying. As Chris was talking about it, I was trying to recall. It was a few many years back, I think. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it.
it was
Yeah,
like
it garnered a
10
lot of.
plus years ago. But
Right, right. So I think it didn't get any support, official or formal support or participation from anyone,
yeah.
if I recall correctly. But I think it created a lot of news and a lot of publicity, I think, on the issue. I believe. Yeah, it was many years ago. It was during, and I'm trying to remember who was the prime minister, or who was the government when that happened. It was in the
It was like the last couple years of Obama, I think. So it was like, or
right, right.
maybe the middle. Yeah,
Mm,
because it had been a long time. There was a ton of. It was basically a rehashing of all the drama that people remembered from 9/11 and uh, from the Iraq War, and they had already come out with the whole figure of like 1 million people had
mm,
died.
mm.
But anyway, what do you think? What do you think the people's position in generally the population of Malaysia, if you were to qualify them as like a in the scope of non-aligned and aligned countries, do you think they fall more within the non-aligned countries, or do you think the people themselves are more aligned with the imperialists sort of mindset?
The I I think it's very diverse, and it depends on the level. Level in the sense of official government positions. I think the government tries to take a more non-aligned and neutral.
Yeah,
I would believe, yeah. Although in the last few years, and I'm not sure, maybe Setare and even yourself, Chris, you might be aware, it has gravitated, especially during the earlier years before the change of government in 2018. I think has gravitated more towards the Middle East, towards Saudi Arabia, and also the few countries, the UAE. Even right now, I think the country is on very good terms with the UAE, in the sense that I think the king went to visit UAE a few times, if I remember. Um, but that's one aspect of it. I think the government is also particularly close to China on the other side. So to the Middle East, to East Asia, it tries to take a more balanced approach, I would believe, to the US and to the EU, maintaining a certain relationship, but also not as close as compared to other countries, I believe. Among the people, views are very diverse. If one would know, like in Malaysia, because it's very ethnically diverse, and the cultural views and sentiments are very different. So in the case of perhaps the Malay Muslim community, for example, they are more inclined or more tied in to information and developments which happen in the Middle East. Whereas other ethnic communities, for example, the ethnic Chinese community, are wired into discourses tied to East Asia, China in particularly. So, but at a very broad level, if I can say so, um, we are not a very um, internationally too sensitive. We get news now and then, but it doesn't actually drive um, domestic or national politics. I would believe, and that would be my view. People know, but it doesn't necessarily take up a lot of space in national conversations.
So if a newspaper ran the headline of like Russia isn't to blame for the Ukraine war, would that be controversial in Malaysia?
No, not actually. I don't think
Okay,
so.
so
Yeah.
you're definitely not aligned.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not a very, people follow, people know, I believe, but it's not a big thing. Again, I think it doesn't drive national politics or national conversations as much as other issues, I would believe.
Yeah, okay, that's fascinating because that would be extremely controversial to say in America. Your newspaper would almost certainly not survive that, and yet it's definitely the truth because America was antagonizing that situation for like eight years prior, and it was never really reported in the U.S. So nobody actually knows the history of 2014 to present Ukraine. They just know the last few months. So yeah, that's a. It's always nice to know that there are countries around the world that aren't completely inundated by the propaganda that we are here in America. People don't realize how heavy it is, but yeah, that must be interesting for you, working for a politician there. Do you feel like you understand, like, do you ever listen to Western media? Like, do you understand sort of the division between the lies that the Western media is saying? Can you understand that? I mean, is that something?
I wouldn't say completely. Again, I think Malaysians are, and Malaysians generally are in some ways very focused inwards as well. It would depend on particular issues, I think. Again, if it was, and also because of historical links and trade. So if issues related to more of what is happening in the Middle East or in Asia, East Asia, in China, Japan, in Taiwan, Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, and Singapore, I think there's much more awareness. So
So what about Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan? What did people think about that?
Yeah, it went into the headlines for a while because again, some politicians and also some of the communities here are more China inclined. So if I remember, one did speak out in saying that it wasn't it wasn't something that should have been done. But I also remember, I think the Foreign Ministry of Malaysia articulating a more neutral approach. I think being the government, it tries to want to have this balance between the two. So it took a more neutral and more diplomatic approach in saying they recognize that it's not it's not appropriate, but also that ties with the U.S. and the trade are also important in maintaining this foreign relations and diplomacy. Debates happen now and then, but the intensity and the division, I would say, in terms of what would I wouldn't know, but from what Chris has mentioned, perhaps not as sharp as it is in other countries. We see in the news now and then, but it doesn't pick up as much as other issues.
That makes sense because it's not a narrative that's meant to control Malaysian thought, so it wouldn't be a sharp division. Like, there wouldn't be a punishing hand to come down and slap you back into line, where there definitely is here. So what about the Saudi influence? Are they opening lots of like Wahhabi madrasas there, or do they have conservative? Are they pushing their conservative religious views
the at least in academic circles, in certain academic circles, writers or some researchers, I think Setarium will have been familiar with all this. Yeah, because of the close links since 20, I wouldn't be sure as to where we should position that moment. But over the last decade or so, particularly before 2018, again, I think relations with Saudi Arabia have been very close, particularly the prime minister, the previous prime, the then and the Malaysian government. So um, many academics have pointed out the cultural and religious influence and narrative, which has also come into Malaysia. A lot of funding goes into also cultural activities, schools, especially in certain areas in Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia. So um, it has more or less not it's not more or less, I'm sorry, has definitely, most certainly influenced the religious and Islamic discourse in Malaysia. But again, I think in my opinion, over the last 4 or 5 years, it has um, 3 or 4 years perhaps since COVID, I think, and that's also because of COVID. I think it has decreased and lessened because of, again, I think many other issues of economy, employment, jobs, and climate. I think they have taken the center stage. But also, they have not gone away, definitely. These religious sentiments and undercurrents, they are still there. And once a while, when issues again, if like in many countries, if issues that relate to race and religion, if they emerge, then it creates again a certain fissure. But other than that, it seems to have decreased and stabilized in the last few years.
That's interesting. I'll let I talked enough. I'll let Satara ask the
No,
question.
it's those are interesting questions that I'm curious to know about. But you mentioned like Saudi influence in Malaysia. Do you think that plays a role in some sort of, I would say, like suppression that happened against Shias in Malaysia for some time? Do you think that's partly because of the Saudi influence, or it has other reasons?
Again, they again referring to some of the work done by some of the academics here. It has definitely an influence. The sort of the kind, or the, how would you say, the discourse of Islam that has been brought in. Um, some would use the term a Salafi oriented way of thinking about Islam, or a discourse of Islam. So and then so looking at other denominators or schools as something that is out perhaps of the orthodoxy. So that has definitely happened, but I would say that would not be the only and single factor. I think because of and this was in the earlier years of the Syrian war, and the war that was happening in the Middle East, the between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and also the other countries. So of course, with Israel and also Palestine, it has always, again, so those issues are hot issues, Chris, in Malaysia, or usually, as compared to or Russia and Ukraine. So Palestinians, the Israel issue. So that has also influenced the way Islam has been practiced and also thought about in Malaysia. And of course, with that, international developments, and also, of course, with political um, discourses that happen here. So again, when there is a particular problem or issue, race and religion somehow always arises and emerges as one
Right.
of the so it's a combination of factors, but definitely I would say the role of the country definitely uh, has an impact, and also the things, the earlier war, ISIS, and of the sort which has take place. It has its spillover effects on the kind of news and information on politics, and also religion and Islam that we consume and also we get over here.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Palestine. I think I was reading maybe a while ago that there were discussions of whether Malaysia would normalize relations with Israel, and it wasn't. I mean, the Malaysian officials mentioned that that's not happening at any time soon, at least. So, is this something that Malaysians discuss and are interested to follow up on, like the Palestinian resistance and like their country's relation with the Zionist regime?
So it's particularly strange situations, in the sense that Malaysia has always been a strong supporter. The Malaysian government has, I would believe, has always been a strong advocate of the Palestinian issue, the Palestinian cause.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, I think trying again, being Malaysia, being as it is, tries to take a more non-aligned and neutral approach to diplomacy, not getting into too the deeper end of many of these issues. So trying to balance, but nevertheless has also expressed a strong position. But at the same time, again, over the years, I think because of the proximity, the closeness between the two governments, I think at least between Malaysia and Saudi Arabia, and also some of the other countries in the Middle East, I think that has taken away some of the bite or intensity in terms of the advocacy
Mm.
Palestine. It is still there. It is still there, but it has sort of decreased that sort of sensitivity and heightened
Mhm.
support. I would say.
So, like, if at some point Malaysia also wanted to normalize relations with Israel, like the Saudi Arabia or UAE did, you think there's like less opposition to it as there was before?
In my view, I wouldn't think that that would happen anytime soon.
That's great.
Although it has that close relation to these countries, but at the same time, because of other factors, including local sentiments, which are historical, and there is a
Mhm.
tradition to it, and also other groups, other political groups, other NGOs, which are also in support of Palestine, and also in terms of the need or the intent of the government to try to take a more neutral approach. So I think that and everything else balances it off, and that would, in my opinion, not be happening anytime soon. Yeah. For example, over here, Mahathir continues to be a very strong supporter of the Palestinian cause. I think it was during his time, again after 2018, that I think he started pivoting again, or at least trying to bring up again the relations with Palestine, Turkey, and other countries, while also at the same time maintaining relations with other Middle Eastern countries.
Right.
Do you
How
see
about
the
Iran? Yeah, go ahead.
just before you get to Iran, I just have a quick question. Do you see the crimes of the Zionists? Like they've recently been doing a lot of killing of Palestinians. Do you see that often reported in the news, the state media or other media? Like, is it something people often hear about or are able to hear about freely?
It does get reported, definitely. issues related to Palestinian, to the Middle East, the war has always been reported. But again, it also depends on local and domestic politics and issues. Again, I would believe I am uncertain whether this would be a positive or negative uh, aspect of it. But when local issues are in the news, so those kind of news gets it
Sure.
lessens,
Yeah.
it lessens, and especially now, I'm not sure if you may be aware of, if you follow. I think everyone is talking about the impending elections in Malaysia. So over the last 1 year or so, everything has been about and also because of the political instability, governments have been changing, switching sides. So our national and political narrative has been more or less consumed by those concerns rather than international developments.
Well, let's talk about Iran for a little bit, and then I want to get back to that and explore COVID and the local politics.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, what about Iran and Malaysia's relation? But before that, maybe you can tell us why you became interested in learning about Iran, and what was because you were doing your postdoc in Iran, right? So can you tell us about your postdoc project and how you became interested in Iran, and what were you exactly studying here?
I always felt that Persian history, Iranian history, is something that's not been discussed or talked about a lot in Malaysia, despite having very strong relations historically and traditionally. I think many writers, historians have spoke about how close um, old or classical Malay civilization or governments or kingdoms had with the Persian civilization or empire, or even just culture more broadly. So while that is there, it has not been discussed a lot. So in university, in UKM, and also when I was doing my Ph.D. in the National University of Singapore, I had the chance to go deeper into this into these subjects and issues, and also with many of the professors in the NUS and also in Iran, with workshops and organizing trips. It gave me the room to explore more, and also to learn more about a culture, a history which is so close and near, and yet, but at the same time, it's also not talked about as much. Yeah, and again, also because as a colonial, as a former colonized country and society, we tend to always look to the West, for example, but that is one way. So in academic and intellectual debates and discourse, we call um, this um, Western or intellectual hegemony, or hegemony, or a certain ism of Western ideas, and thoughts. But looking at neighboring countries, for example, I always felt that countries in Asia, it is important to have that Asian perspective. Looking at Indonesia, looking at other Southeast Asian countries, looking at Iran, looking at Japan, and also other countries on the eastern part. But the opportunity for the study of Iran came up, and I think it has been very helpful and useful. So, and I think it's again not talked about as much in the academic sphere. I think it's important to learn and understand Iranian history, Persian history, politics, culture and religion. Um, Many perspectives that we don't get here, again because of the dominant um, discourses that we have here. But those are very useful. So that curiosity and that interest sort of got me into, I suppose, where I am today, and also the program that I did in Tehran, in Alzahra, 2 years ago, before coming back to Kuala Lumpur.
Right. What was the program about?
It was a postdoctoral research position. So it gave me the chance to do a comparative study of Malaysian and also Iranian intellectuals on political ideas and society,
Interesting.
more broadly.
So who were the Iranian intellectuals that you studied about, if you can tell us?
It spanned from thinkers who were in the constitutional movement,
Mhm.
the what do you call the constitutionalists in Persian?
Mashrutiyat.
The Mashrutiyat people.
Mashrutiyat, yes.
Yeah.
Or Mashrutiyat.
But also in I think it's interesting in academic writing is always to capture the contestations that were happening. So on one hand, you had the constitutionalists, Hussein Naini and many others, but also on the other side, you have people who were more inclined to a more different vision of society. And then moving up to the pre-Iranian, before the Iranian Revolution, people who were involved in Tabatabai, Motahari, Khomeini, and of course that whole group. And then moving a bit up into the post-Iranian, also Shariati including, of course, before that. And then moving up a bit into the post-Iranian with some of the reformist discourse, but also tied into some of the more other sorts of competing ideas at the same time also that were prevalent. Yeah, so some of those thinkers, but also some writers also try to cover some writers who were also part of these movements.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Thank you.
So, yeah, it's fascinating how. Yeah, and it's very interesting that you compared them to Malaysian intellectuals, right? What were like, let's say, what was the most interesting maybe similarity that you found between the two countries' intellectuals? Was there something that surprised you, or you just found fascinating about the two countries' intellectuals?
I through my readings, I developed a hunch, but then I would believe and argue that I think that hunch would be true, in the sense that I always felt that both societies, as with many other societies, we're always concerned with the idea or question of social justice, how framings of social justice engulf and consume and even shape the way events, revolutions in the case of Iran, reform movements in Malaysia, they are all shaped by framings of the idea of what we understand by social justice. And attached to that, my belief is always that in these framings of social justice, ideas of culture cannot be separated, whether be it religious ideas, be it literary ideas, they are always attached to how or influence the way we understand social justice. So moving away from that strict civil, legal, political dimension of it, but also involving a cultural perspective and dimension to those questions.
Do you think that the idea of social justice is sort of used as a kind of a universal justification of state power in postmodern democracies. That's sort of how I see it. I get like in the U.S., it's everyone loves talking about social justice now, but the state is actually not just at all, and is just does horrible things. I mean, there's a litany of state crimes every day, and yet, people somehow have it in their head that the state is there basically to protect, the weak or the vulnerable, and yet it's obviously not. So there's kind of this myth of social justice. It seems to be, obviously, if you went back in history, most societies or states or whatever were imposed by force, and people had no choice, and there was no. But once you enter democracy into it in a postmodern sense, the state has to be benevolent in some way, or else people vote it out. I mean, so do you think social justice is sort of used in that way in both contexts as sort of like a either legitimate or illegitimate rationale for state power?
Definitely, Chris, definitely. Social justice is always a contested and multi-age concept used by different people for different purposes at different times for different reasons. What would perhaps be a form or discourse of social justice today might then be co-opted and used as a state-driven narrative of social justice the next day, depending on how the situation is. But and also as Chris mentioned, the horrors and the tragedies of war that has been waged in the name of justice and also democracy and freedom in many different ways it's always a reminder that these concepts and ideas are not neutral, but in my opinion and perspective, it makes it even more important to understand and to study the ideologies and the contestations which takes place around these issues. What is actually and who is articulating what and for what reason? Does it speak for the government? Does it speak for the elite? Or does it speak for those on the margins and the oppressed or the underrepresented? So I think that whole field is something that's worth discussing and studying about. And especially, I think, framings and articulations of social justice from the fringes or from the margins, counter discourses of justice are always very interesting in comparison to state-sanctioned and state-driven or dominant discourses of social justice.
That's a really good point, because if you look at in the US's case, like you look at Black Lives Matter, and then you talk to actual Black people living in communities, you get almost completely different narratives. Like there's when you have a state sort of sanctioned or funded or corporate funded, where in the U.S. the case of state and corporate is not much different. So when you have this large movements that get co-opted by big powerful forces and sort of go under the guise of social justice, it can be tricky, because if someone is just an average citizen wanting to do good and they hear the word social justice or they hear anti-racism, they think, oh, these are automatically really good things. And sometimes you can get wrapped up in activism that's a little bit different than what you intended, I think, which is something I think people have learned in the U.S. over. I don't know if they've learned it very well, but some people have. So that's a really good point, that the state-sanctioned social justice and social justice from the margins, from the people, from the unwashed masses, they're very different. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely I agree. And I think those are the interesting ones that I think need more discussion and study. They should be brought up to the mainstream conversations.
Well,
Yeah,
they're actually the legitimate ones. They're actually
Yeah.
the marginal and democratic voices of social justice are legitimate. The illegitimate ones are the ones that are given power that they don't deserve because of establishment support. That's how I would phrase it.
Yeah.
How do you view that in Iran, Sarah? How do you view the social justice in Iran? That's a very interesting question because Iran is always viewed as this like top-down, no democrat. At least in the U.S., the crazy propaganda about Iran. It's like the mullahs do everything and nobody has any freedom. So how could you describe social justice in Iran? How we just sort of phrased it? Just curious.
Well, I think it's mostly, I mean, definitely the establishment supports the social justice movements that are mostly in favor of I mean, it gives some more legitimacy to the state. But I think most of the social justice movements or like calls for justice in that area that I know of are coming from the grassroots. Like it's not something that um, that maybe the establishment would support or like yeah pay that much attention to. For example, I would say um, like with women's rights, that's something that you see the grassroots. I mean, it comes from the people. But I think the problem in Iran is that there are a lot of social justice movements that are usually like hijacked by, I would say, like fake supporters from outside, and that makes it even more difficult for people inside to like support a cause because it becomes very easy for the establishment to label that as something that is happening from outside Iran. Like for example, there are a lot of women who are fighting for their rights here and they want to see improvements, but then there are, I don't know, like US funded or UK funded or even Saudi funded media giving like headlines or people like Iranian expats that are fully supported and even paid by like hostile governments, hostile to Iran. And then I mean they're trying to kind of, I would say, like they're trying to hijack that movement and show it like their way of showing support or getting involved with what's happening inside Iran makes it very difficult for women inside Iran to fight for that cause because it becomes very, very easy to label them as, like US backed or I don't know, UK backed. And then it loses the legitimacy of the movement. It
The
becomes
U.S.
very
is
difficult.
also constantly sitting there waiting to hijack anyone who's raising a legitimate concern about.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like you fear if you actually care about the stability of your country, it's very hard to say anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you have to fight 2-3 wars. It's like your struggle becomes multi-dimensional and you have to fight those foreign forces, but also the establishment, but also how like the issue that you were involved, like also fight in a way that would actually improve the situation for women, because a lot of those things that come from outside make like they actually impede the progress. They're not helping and they're making it just more difficult. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Yeah. Maybe Ken, do you have an idea about that because you lived here for 2 years and you were also like exploring the idea of social justice among Iranian intellectuals too?
Yeah, I think what Setare mentioned, I think that's very true, and even more true for a country like Iran, in the sense that it is always a geopolitical issue and geopolitical question. I think the stakes are very high for people who are or want to have an interest on the state of affairs in Iran. I think so. As Setare mentioned, you always end up fighting. I would feel two or three different wars at the same time. Wars, yeah, um,
Yeah.
conflicts at the same time because of how high the stakes are over there. I would think like perhaps in a country like Malaysia, where the stakes are not so high, interference or what occurs here does not impact international trends as much. I would feel maybe then the stakes are not so high. So opportunities for people to get involved or try to get involved or show that they are involved are less as compared to a country like Iran. Any intent or project aimed at uplifting or empowering a certain community or issue, it's always under the risk of being hijacked, so to say, and also being labeled as a Western. And actually it used to happen here in the past as well. Although somehow because of social media, I think we have managed to sort of make to lessen that because previously many again like Satare pointed out, many movements for rights including women's rights and free academic freedom, for example, in the past were very easily dismissed as Western interference and culture. But I think because of the local movement and because of social media and the internet, I think that has no longer been able to um, haunt what is happening locally. But I think Iran, yeah, definitely because of so many reasons, it has always been very difficult.
Right.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah. Yeah, it
complicated.
has changed here too. Like because yeah, exactly. I would say social media has played a role in that too. And there are more people from inside Iran who are like pro-establishment and pro-Iran, but they uh like have reasons to support those kinds of movements, and they're speaking out. So to minimize the effect, that interference, and to just to like safeguard and save their movement from being hijacked or being totally dismissed. But it's not only that. I mean, it's also that I think like those interferences also try to change the priority for women. Like for example, women in Iran, probably the majority of Iranian women are more concerned with women's rights in marriage or in other issues, but then you get a lot of coverage on like obligatory hijab, which I mean, it is an issue here, and there are people fighting for it, but it's not. It's probably not the first priority that like Iranian women would want to change. Like and they are like fighting for other causes that are a lot more important for them, like I don't know, like equality in education and in job opportunities. And then you see someone starting and I don't know, like giving a lot of media attention to other issues that are also legitimate but not the first priority. So that's why I say it just makes the struggle even more complicated, and you have to be very careful with a lot of things. Yeah. Yeah. So what about Iran, Malaysia relations? Do you think a lot of people in Malaysia know about Iran, or what's the perception that they have of Iran? Or where do you think they get that perception from?
I think the stereotype still persists. Um, Also an outcome of the developments over the past many years, a decade or so. If 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 it's yeah if I could say so. The stereotype of Iran being a different, a sort of a different Islamic country, a form of Islam or school of Islam that's not accepted within the mainstream, what we understand as Islam, and also not part of the orthodoxy. So that stereotype still persists. The last 2022, 2020, the last 4 years, when the change of government in 2018 took place, there were, I think, attempts to try to, again, through international relations and through national politics and conversations, to try to balance up. But because the government only stood for about 2 years before again switching back to a different coalition, I think that has sort of maintained status quo. So status quo in the sense that stereotypes of the country and the religion still persist. But again, as with all things, issues which are sensitive are also practical and expedient for certain reasons at certain times if they are useful to cover or to distract from certain issues. So where I'm going with this, what I'm trying to say, I would suppose is that it is there. No, it has not been as intense and spoken of, but not because that it is not there. It is still there, but also that it has not been used to that purpose and effect for those divisions and for those distractions. There are a few groups here and there, but they still continue to be the again, as we say, the margins and the minorities. People who are more aware, I suppose, or wired in. And again, because perhaps our society is not one that is actually too wired into national, international developments all the time, only maybe certain times. I think that also influenced the way we understand and think of Iran. If there were more coverage, more interactions at every level, I feel those stereotypes wouldn't be there. But it is difficult because it is also at the same time, it is cultural, but also at the same time structural and also institutional. But as a matter of foreign relations, I would say and believe that relations with Iran has always been more or less there. We have a consulate and also an embassy here. I believe the other day the ambassador paid a courtesy visit to a few government leaders and officials also. So on that part, it has always been maintained, but the undercurrents are the one that's usually not spoken of or discussed as much, and what these views entail and the consequences that they create.
So while you were in Iran, did you have the perception that this is more or less the same with Iranians' perception of Malaysia, or is it different? Because I would personally say that probably Iranians have a more positive image of Malaysia than Malaysians have of Iran. Is that something that you also have felt?
Yes, I would agree and believe so. Yeah. Some wouldn't know. Some wouldn't know Malaysia as compared to maybe other countries. But for those that do, all in all, the feedback and responses have always been positive and supportive of Malaysia as a economically developed country, politically stable generally, relatively, and also which at one time was a particular favorite destination for many Iranians, I think, and which I think continue to be, only because of COVID. I think it has really declined. But if the previous trends were to stand, Iranians generally do and still visit, have a very good positive impression of Malaysia.
Yeah, that's true. And I think at least for some point there was this perception in Iran that Malaysia is a genuine Islamic country with economic development and independence and everything. So like you said, those who knew about Malaysia and Iran usually had very positive ideas. Yeah. So, Chris, do you have questions?
Yeah,
You
well,
wanted
I
to ask
just brought up
something.
COVID. I
Yeah.
always have questions about COVID.
Mhm.
The entire narrative is a giant question for me. But I'm curious, the lockdowns, Malaysia had some of the toughest lockdowns in the world. How long did they last?
We had two big lockdowns, if I remember correctly. One which was throughout 2020 from around April to September, and then another one which extended from the end of 2020 right up to the middle of 2021. Please forgive me if I get it
Wow.
wrongly,
So
because
like two chunks of almost half a year
right,
each.
right,
Wow.
half a year each, yeah. So only towards, if I remember correctly, because we had so many lockdowns, I think I've lost my
Yeah,
sense of time and also
we all did.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
That's
it was
true.
only towards the end of the middle or towards the end of 2021 that I think things because of the vaccination actually it really didn't really decline or gone off yet, but because of the vaccination program and what the government was doing, and the consensus here was the government needed to open up, so it happened simultaneously with the vaccination program at its highest point. So I think that was uh, mid from mid onwards 2021 things started opening up, yeah, despite numbers hovering at a high level, but
Keep
then
going
also
up.
decreased,
Yeah.
yeah, but also
So it was
decreased after that.
irrespective of the numbers. It was more because of the vaccination program started, so they felt like they can open.
Right, and
Right.
they felt that the two lockdowns were too punishing, not only in terms of,
Right.
in fact, in the case of Malaysia, I would believe different from the US, maybe many other countries. It was not only the social or the freedom, independence, democratic aspect that was important, but I think economic concerns were the
Mhm.
priority. So the
Well, we had
government
that too in the U.S. I mean, it wasn't talked about, but that was the major outcome.
concern,
Was yeah, it was dire economic problems because a lot of the people making the policies are what some people call the laptop class, who are able to lock down because all their jobs are on the laptop, right? But
right,
the people that they're imposing those policies aren't. They have to actually use their hands and go out in the world to do their work. And yeah, so it had devastating effects, especially on children. I mean, some of the I read, I think it was Los Angeles school district can't account for like thousands and thousands of students. They just like disappeared from the record and they've never come back and they don't know where they are. And so it's an impact, and that's just here in the developed, quote unquote, developed world. In Africa, like there's I mean, unbelievable studies showing how many people in. I think there was a study in Uganda showing how many people, just the children. I think it was a third of the entire school age children have just been lost from school because of the economic situation. They either had to go to school or do work, or in the case of girls, they got pregnant. So, like, I mean, they like when you interrupt that pattern of schooling, you devastate the entire life of many millions and millions of children around the world. So, but along those lines of terrible policy making, how has the lockdown affected the political race? Do people talk about, are some like of the politicians who were calling for lockdowns, are they being penalized in the political race and people calling them out for, for doing those things, or how is it perceived?
so that's the interesting part. So across the board, the debate was more on the issues of lockdown wasn't as contentious as compared to government policies to address the economic situation during and after the lockdown. So many of the issues which sway people wasn't so much on their positions on the lockdown per se. I think many of the politicians and people generally, at least right up to the second lockdown, were sort of in consensus that it was something needed and necessary. Of course, if the lockdown were to extend to a third one, I think then there would be political divisions there, because some was already, and also it was tied down to, again, government responses and also failures. But up till there, there was still consensus on what was needed. But how and what to do, especially in terms of the economy, then was the one that was more in the news rather than the lockdown itself per se.
Oh, that's interesting. So
Yeah.
has COVID played a factor in any other way in the election discussions and debates? Has the people like demanded more vaccines, or is there any other COVID drama that's incorporated into the domestic politics?
I think what has become the most obvious throughout what the pandemic has shown us is that the inequality between different sections of society is glaring, whether in terms of whether politically, economically, socially. As Chris mentioned, it's so important. Like in countries, for example, in Africa, of course, not only in Africa, in terms of the issue of education, so social economic education questions, how many of our students and young people have dropped out from the social structure and institutions. Economically, how polarized and unequal our society is, with the elite making money and profit despite COVID and despite many people going bankrupt and jobless for a long period of time. And politically, how many of the elite and people get away with certain actions while the common person, the common man or a person, as we say, get punished for violation of laws and regulations. So I think it's very glaring. I think many people have now become aware on how unequal in every way our society is, how certain people can get away with certain things, whereas others have to suffer the consequences of it. I think that has really become part of the political narrative and discourse at the moment. So many people talking about it.
To like elaborate on that dynamic, is there any skepticism about the vaccine or about pharmacological research or big pharma corporations? Do you hear people talk about, because all of your vaccines are coming from American companies, right?
Right, yeah.
So is there any skepticism of American corporations injecting things in your arms?
It was at one time. And It was at one time, especially when the vaccination drive was at its highest, and also by certain groups, communities. But again, I think it's very much influenced by external factors and also development. So as the economy opened up, I think, and as the rate became higher. So I think generally Malaysians do subscribe to the vaccine because from what the numbers show, I think our society, our country is one of the ones that has a high percentage of vaccinated population. So in that sense,
Right.
in that sense, I would believe there's a tendency to be okay with it, but of course, now and then, depending again on domestic and international developments, and also depending on certain groups, the sentiment is still there.
But did you get all your vaccines from the US? Like, what was the company that got most vaccines in Malaysia? Was it Pfizer and Moderna?
I think three. I think in Malaysia, the three most prominent ones, or the more ones I used, are the Pfizer, the AZ. AZ is by a UK, a European.
Yeah,
UK.
AstraZeneca.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and the one by China, what Sinovac.
Sinopharm. Sinovac. Okay.
Yeah, so those three are. So yeah, so even then you see there's a balance. There's some from China, there's from US, and then there's some from
Right.
Europe.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you could get the Chinese or the American one. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, you have a big Chinese population there, so I'm sure
Right.
they were
Right.
more. Wow, that's interesting. You might be one of the only countries in the world that considers someone fully vaccinated if they had the American or the Chinese vaccine. I think most countries elsewhere, like here, I don't think the Chinese vaccine counts for anything, and I think in a lot of the Chinese-aligned countries, the American vaccine doesn't count. So, or maybe it does. America's sort of a big bully, but definitely the Chinese vaccine is totally non. It's like a nothing here. People would be like, "Sign a what?" So yeah, that's really interesting. That yeah. Did you get that in Iran? The Sinopharm?
Yeah, we had the Chinese vaccine, and that
Okay.
was like the one that most people wanted to get, and
Yeah, because
got it.
obviously, how many?
Yeah,
people
but there were
wanted-
also people who wanted to get Pfizer, and they were very dissatisfied with the government not importing enough Pfizer, and some people even traveled to Armenia or Turkey because they wanted to have the real vaccine and not the ones. We also got
Tehran should
that.
collect a list of those people's names and keep them in a database.
Oh my God.
Uh,
Yeah, I personally know people who went to Turkey because they wanted to get Pfizer.
well, I hope they stay healthy.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Uh,
Yeah. But
yeah, well,
most
it's good.
people that I know got Sinopharm. Yeah.
I can
And some,
imagine.
like the older ones got AstraZeneca, and yeah, the majority of people I know, they either got Sinopharm, and a few people got also the Iranian vaccine. So yeah, we had a wide range of options. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it was an interesting time, and I certainly hope it's not happening again. Do you have any sense dealing with politics there? Are people sort of dropping hints that they think this thing is going to keep going and there's going to be more of it in the fall? Do you hear hints of that in the political discourse? Like, oh, be prepared for lockdown soon again. Monkeypox is coming.
I think it's
Or maybe
there.
climate change.
Yeah, it comes from it is there, but it comes from select groups, interests, or how do you say, policy based groups, and the other one I don't think, while it is there, I would suppose, but it has not taken a um how do you say, propaganda or a controversial turn, in the sense that I think there is an awareness. So it's couched within the language of public health and also climate change, in the sense that if society or the government is not prepared for environmental destruction, ways of managing health, and the intersections between health, environment, and also politics, if the government fails to address those issues through policy, I think perhaps not the issues of lockdown per se, but the issues of how we deal with public health, changes in health of societies influenced by changes and disruptions in the environment, where nature and society and the human population has become even more intertwined, and also in conflicting positions in different ways. So it's more or less couched in that way. But of course, yeah, you get also different groups, taking on the different controversial and those kind of things, yeah, about lockdowns, of how this is a scheme or some part of a larger thing, yeah. But by and large, I think the awareness is there, and there's more pressure for discussions on those intersections between climate and also health and society.
So it's sort of keeping the all the tools on the table, I guess. That's what without.
Right.
So if they whatever next threat comes our way, they're yeah. I feel like that's the same here too. They've basically just no one's been criticized for in any official way or anything for any of the policies that were done. So, and there's no real critiques or except for some few politicians that are easily branded like right-wing extremists or whatever, and so they're discounted by the majority of intellectuals. And so there's very little rational discourse on managing that kind of thing. So I feel like there's possibly with environment, like I feel like they're trying, at least the narratives that are being pushed by certain capital-driven forces are trying to shape climate lockdowns in the future. So, yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that. So, that's something to keep our eyes on. That's a narrative that's developing or not. But yeah, I think that's about all the questions I have. Unless there's is there any stories that you have from your time in Iran that were like that are good, like campfire stories? You know, like when you sit around a campfire and tell a story. Do you have any good stories about your time in Iran that you tell people about?
As always, I think Iranians take pride in being a hospitable and friendly society. I think if I remember correctly, Satare. So my time in Iran, I truly enjoyed it, and it's always been because of the people. I think it makes the trip and the stay worthwhile. Of course, Iran is also a beautiful place. In every way, from nature to culture to history, but also because of the people. I think Iran is always a good place and happy place to be. Not happy, but it's always a place where you always can feel that you can be comfortable and also do things. And there are people who are always very friendly and also very helpful to be there. And also I think that's what makes the place and the trips there very worthwhile and nice.
Do you have any plans to visit again?
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll see what happens. After this, it'll be good to now the flights are quite still very the prices range, and then it's also inconsistent.
Right.
So maybe hopefully in the next few months, or maybe so, we'll see if things can come to a more stable, and then definitely be happy to go there again.
Yeah, let's see. Inshallah, we'll visit. Yeah.
and
Okay,
also
so
vice versa. Let me know if you come by to Kuala
Yeah, I'll
Lumpur.
come to Penang and have some fruit. I heard the fruit in Penang was great from my friend who traveled there.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
she
we should go.
sent me pictures of like
We're
the
happy to
market.
bring you around, Chris, and also Satari. Yeah.
All right, we can.
Yeah,
we
so
can
far
come
we
to-
have plans to travel to Tajikistan and Kenya,
Alright.
and now we have Malaysia on the list, right, Chris?
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be an epic trip.
Right.
Great. Thank you, Ken, for your time, and it was great to catch up with you after a long time.
Right. Thank you so much, Satari. Good to see you, Kaylee. Ushal Shodan.
Great.
I see. I forgot.
No, that was perfect.
So forgetful. Yeah, I've not been using. I think for 2 years now. Yeah, I can't remember the terms anymore. Thank you very
Well,
much.
that was good.
Yeah, and then also Chris, good to see you. Maybe catch up more next time. Ask about. I was doing all the talking this time. Maybe I can get Chris to share.
Well, you're the special guest, so you can
Yeah,
interview me
exactly.
next time. That's fine. We can we can start a podcast for you. We can interview
Okay. Yeah. Very. Yeah. Be Very nice to listen more from Chris also. I haven't had the chance to speak more. But thank you so much.
Yeah, but next time we
having
can
me.
do it at a time where it's not 1:00 a.m. my time, and I'll be a little bit more interesting to talk to.
All right. So so sorry. My apologies.
No, it's not your fault. It's just the world we live on. It's round.
Right. Okay. Thanks
Yeah, so
much,
like
Chris.
you
Yeah,
two have
thanks for that.
12 hours of time difference, right?
12 hours.
And I'm
so,
like, yeah,
Okay.
12 hours, and I have like 3.5 hours with Ken and 8 hours and a half with
Okay.
Chris. So
Oh, that's bad.
yes.
Okay.
works.
That would be difficult, but yeah, it was
it
a
works.
great conversation. Anyway.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been a good conversation, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Right. Same here.
Yeah.
And
thanks everyone.
Setari. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sakiram.
Thank you. Kahish Mukoni. Thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning into another episode of Twice Told Tales podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.